Hello, I'm Susan, and I want to take you along as I compare a couple of palettes that I use sometimes when I go out and do plein air painting or when I'm around the house and not here in my studio when I just feel like sitting down and doing a little bit of sketching. So I'm comparing my little box that I made myself with pans of watercolor paints that are some of my favorite paints, mostly Daniel Smith paints, but there are a few other paints in here. And I have made a sample of each one of my pans so that when I look at my little palette, I can see what colors I'm painting with. And I also listed on the back of this card exactly what those paints are. So these right now are my very favorite paints that I like to take on a trip or out and about with me. My favorites change from time to time, but a lot of them stay the same. And I really love Derwent Inktense pencils. I've been using them for years. So I got a Derwent, which is made in the UK. These are Inktense pans that come in a box, and these are 24 paints in a box. And I'm going to do a quick study, a little floral, and I'm going to do the same painting, one with this set and one with this set, and see how they compare. So stay with me. Here we go. So this is my resource photo. I have it on my phone, and I have borrowed it from my dear friend Laura. It's got some pretty colors, and I'm going to use my Chinese calligraphy brush. I often just use sort of sometimes I call them junky brushes. No pressure. If I leave this one behind on a park bench or something, it's not going to be any big deal. I'm starting out using my beautiful artist quality watercolors, and my mission is to see how the watercolors compare to the Derwent pans. This is sort of a favorite way of painting. I just sort of pop in some marks, and I love bright colors, so florals are one way of using all the beautiful reds and oranges and yellows from the palette. Now I'm going to switch over and start to apply the Derwent colors. Interestingly, the water that I sprayed on them earlier had a little bit more time to reconstitute these, and they go on really beautifully. They went on a little bit more saturated than the watercolors did. My watercolors earlier weren't quite as saturated. I'm using a dancing around the paper technique, a little bit of wet on wet. My colors kind of flow into each other. That's one of my favorite sketching techniques that makes watercolors and very liquid water media do its own thing on the paper. I'm leaving lots of little bits of white of the paper because I like that. I like, to figure out which marks are my favorite marks and use them. So I'm not really worrying about doing a likeness. I'm simply being inspired by this photograph. It doesn't matter to me whether the flowers are in the right place. I'm putting much more color on the picture plane than the photo has. And I'm dancing around and doing flowers first. And while those are drying, then I will go down and put some of the foliage in. So I'm working with the Inktense again. They're quite beautiful when they're wet. Of course, watercolor is really beautiful when it's wet as well. Watercolor, however, needs to be put on, it needs to be used in a very saturated way if you want it to dry and maintain its brilliance, because watercolor does dry a little bit lighter, paler, if that's an appropriate word. And Derwent products are essentially, the properties of the Derwent paints, the Inktense paints, I should say, it's as though they are acrylics, so they do dry a little bit darker, unlike the watercolor. And also, once you paint with them and they dry, they don't lift. That's another difference in property from watercolor. Watercolors, with the exception of a few staining colors, you can go back in and lift some color. And so that's a subtractive approach to watercolor that you don't have with the Derwent Inktense paints. I'm popping in a little bit of that blue, the violet blue that's around the photo. I'm trying to recreate a situation where if I'm out in the garden or in a botanical garden, I like to paint really fast. Now I have sped this up. Certainly you can tell that I don't paint quite this fast. The video is sped up because I don't like my viewers to have to watch paint dry per se. But I do like to dance my brush around fairly quickly, because the environment in a botanical garden or a setting outside is going to change pretty rapidly sometimes. The lighting changes, things dry very quickly usually, and so I like to get right in there, and sometimes that really works to your advantage. You can get out of your own way and get some marks down. They don't have to be perfect. You don't have to create a perfect painting. In fact, I published a video on YouTube yesterday that was maybe one of the ugliest paintings I've done in many years. I was trying a wet on wet technique with this Derwent palette. I opened it and tried a wet on wet technique, and I learned some things not to do with that palette. It really doesn't work very beautifully wet on wet. The colors kind of sink into the paper. They dry in a sort of matte finish, so the glow of the paper doesn't show through like it does with most watercolors. And yet I wanted to publish that because I want people to learn, just like I'm glad that I learned how not to use a particular type of paint. Trial and error is the way that I learn my techniques of how to do artwork. I usually have to push something past the point of beautiful and realize, oh, I should have stopped sooner. Next time I do a painting, I will know that. So I learn from trial and error, and that's part of the fun. Now I'm going in and I'm putting some darks in. And I'm switching over here to put some darks with the Inktense. The Inktense paints have a limited number of colors. I think these 24 are as many colors as they put out. And I'm really crazy about my various greens in watercolor. I have some favorites that are not really duplicated in the Inktense. So color-wise, I really prefer the warmer greens that are on the left that are watercolors, but these are splitting hairs at this point. I'm just popping in shapes. I'm really not referring to my photo anymore. I am kind of putting in shapes around some of my leaf shapes that I put in earlier. Let's see here. I'm adding a little bit of greens here and there. I think I went for some more yellowy greens up higher. I put the darker ones below, figuring that the greens at the bottom might be, some of them are in the shadow back behind, and some of them are lit by the sun maybe. This is 135 pound Jack Richardson student grade watercolor paper, and I often use this for sketching. Now I'm just putting kind of some final touches at the top with my Inktense. Dancing my brush around. Notice I usually hold on to my brush sort of up at the top of the handle. I don't like to hold my brush down near the ferrule, near the brushes, because I want the brush to have sort of a bouncy feel, so I don't choke it and put marks down that look too rigid. This is more playful looking marks to me, and marks make a big difference. The way that you create marks on your paper makes a big difference in your final result. I do like marks and shapes. Now I've gotten my palette knife out, and this is another favorite tool of mine. I actually scrape a little bit of the color onto the tip, and this is how I often put stems into my paintings. So I'm creating a different type of mark with a different tool, and this leads the eye around. When you look at my painting, it helps to lead the eye from bottom to top. And you want people to have their eye move all around your painting. So this helps to do that. I'm putting a little bit of dark in there for some reason. I'm just experimenting with my Inktense palette here. You'll have to take my word for the fact that these Inktense work a little bit differently from the watercolors. They don't blend on the paper quite as beautifully as an end result. They dry differently from watercolors. I'm popping in some little bits of yellow centers into my flowers, and you'll be able to see that better when you see the close-up, the end result. But this is just a little pop of yellow and orange, or new gamboge. By the way, the Inktense colors don't have the same naming properties as all of the professional quality watercolor paints. So I don't think that's called new gamboge. Let's see. No, it's called sun yellow. So yeah, none of the naming conventions remain consistent, and they are not entirely color fast. Derwent publishes a chart that shows its color fastness, and some of the colors leave a lot to be desired in terms of permanence or color fastness. that is the Inktense paints. So, you know, you have to take that into consideration. I am a stickler for archivability. I want my paintings to look good long after I'm dead and gone, and so I kind of like to use archival paints for the most part. But when I'm sketching for things in my sketchbooks, it doesn't matter so much. So I'm just popping a little bit of yellow and new gamboge into my flowers, into my watercolor flowers. Just a little bit more. And we're about to call it done. So let's take a look, close up of the Derwent Inktense paints and a close up of the watercolors. They're both wet. I will put in here images once they're dry, and you can decide which you like. So we have watercolor on the left, Derwent Inktense on the right. Here's a bit of a close-up of the watercolor. And this is a close-up of the Derwent. They're both vibrant and quite beautiful. So you can let me know in comments which one you like best. And don't forget to subscribe. I'm delighted that you spent this 20 minutes with me, 17 minutes with me. And do watch for future videos. Thank you for spending the time. Bye-bye.